go ahead and begin. I would like to just first point out that this meeting will be recorded. We want to make sure that this is available to people that could not attend and are able to watch later. And I also want to share with all of you that there will be an opportunity for you to provide feedback, and we'll talk about that and how that fits into the context of the recruitment process. So that's a great place to begin. I want to take a few minutes and just thank everyone for your attendance and your input. The Oleo Director for King County is a position that's very important, very prominent in the community, and it's one that is appointed by the King County Council. The King County Council has engaged on the search process that's been going on for the last several months, and I'd like to just start off by letting you know where we're at in the search process, what lies ahead, and how your input is being used in the overall decision and final selection. So we opened the recruitment back in March of this year, and it's hard to believe we're getting near the end already, but back in March 22nd, the recruitment opened. It ran for several weeks and closed on May 3rd. We had 32 candidates from across the nation that had submitted their interest for the position, and we worked through a vetting process to narrow that group down. Part of that really worked back at the beginning when the council established a recruitment advisory committee, which was a 10-member committee that was represented a cross-section across King County, especially as it related to this position of the Oleo Director. And that committee provided input into the beginning of the search process into the desired characteristics and qualities sought in the next Oleo Director. And they'll engage again here soon. Once we closed the recruitment, we had a 3-member King County Council subcommittee do some initial interviews of candidates. And from those initial interviews, advanced 2 candidates as finalists. We're going to get a chance to meet those 2 candidates tonight. And in the next steps of the recruitment, we're going to get a lot of different feedback that we can provide to the council and help them with their decision. I will point out that in the state of Washington, the candidates are confidential until they become finalists. And as it relates to the recruitment, that's helpful because it helps us attract talent as people can explore their interest in the position without having to be exposed to their current employers. And it helps us get a stronger candidate pool. And we just emerge with finalists when they become public in the state of Washington. So having said that, I just want to finish up and talk about some next steps in the process. The 2 finalists met today with the staff in the Oleo office just to explore fit and get feedback captured from the staff that can be shared with the council. We have 2 community meetings, one right now, obviously, and then another one tomorrow midday. And in these 2 meetings, we're going to capture feedback from all of you that are interested and those that may watch later through a survey instrument. Once we get going into the meeting, I'll post the link to the survey in the chat, and I'll also post it on my profile, on my thumbnail, so you'll be able to see it and copy it and provide feedback. And I'll probably just continue to post it periodically in the chat. And we want to make sure everybody has access to the link to provide feedback. And the same process will be used for tomorrow's meeting. Next week on Monday, the finalists will also interview with the King County Council Recruitment Advisory Committee that I mentioned earlier. That's that 10-member cross-section. And these 2 meetings, the interview with the Recruitment Advisory Committee, the feedback from the staff that the Oleo staff from their meeting today, along with the candidates' written qualifications and experience, are all going to be considered by the council as they begin their final interviews of candidates on July 20th, Tuesday of next week. So I just want to take a minute and recap the process before we get into the real meat of why we're here today, and that is to meet these 2 candidates. Once we begin, just to give you a sense of the format, our first candidate tonight is Mr. Eddie Aubry. And when we bring Mr. Eddie Aubry into the room, into the meeting, He'll have approximately 5 minutes to introduce himself to the King County community through this meeting. And during that introduction, he'll be explaining his career, his qualifications as they relate to this position, but also why he's interested and why he'd like to be the next director of OLEO for King County. Following that introduction, we have 3 prepared questions that the candidates were given in advance. They're related to the position. I'll be asking the candidates those 3 questions, and all of you will have the opportunity to hear their responses to some topics that they've had some time to think about. Following those 3 questions, we're going to open it up and accept questions from any of you. Since this is a large group, we have about 35 in the meeting. I'll ask you to use the raise hands feature in Zoom. For those that are not familiar, at the very bottom of your Zoom window, there is a reactions button. Depending what platform you're on, it may be in a different location, but if you click on the reactions button, you have an opportunity to raise your hand, and that will signal to us that you have a question. We'll be able to go ahead and take those in an orderly way. And we'll continue to let candidates answer questions until about 20 minutes have passed, and then we'll wrap up with that candidate. We have about a 10-minute intermission break between the 2 candidates. And so after our break, we will come back with our second candidate, Mr. Tamer Abazayed, and follow that same format with Mr. Abazayed. Following that, we'll have some closing remarks. And again, another opportunity, reminder about the survey opportunity about how you can provide feedback. So with that all said, we are going to go ahead and begin. And as we do, I will just start off right now and put that survey link in the chat. So anyone in here should be able to see the survey link in the chat. And again, we'll make that very prominent. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and bring in Mr. Eddie Aubry. Eddie.
Hello. Start video.
Well, welcome to our community meeting. This is the point where we're going to go ahead and get things started. And I'm going to ask you the first 3 questions. The first 4 questions. One is about your introduction.
Oh, okay.
We're going to turn it over to members of the community for some follow-up questions after that.
Okay.
All right, well, very good. So if you would please just begin and share with us your background and experience, especially as it relates to the position of the Director of Office of Law Enforcement Oversight, and also why you'd like to be that director in King County.
All right. Thank you, Greg. First, I'm excited and honored to meet all of you here, even though I can't see you on Zoom. I have a passionate, lifelong, demonstrated history of experience to make a difference and add value in civilian oversight, the community, and in police services. If given this opportunity, this may be the most important work I have ever done. I think my story can illustrate who I am better. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about my background. I was born in Tacoma, but grew up in South Central Los Angeles as a bicultural individual of African-American and Korean descent, where I saw racial inequalities in the community. Some examples of what I saw were racial discrimination in housing in Tacoma and in Los Angeles, where my parents were discriminated against in order to get housing. And personally, as a teenager, I had an identity crisis of not belonging to any particular ethnic group because of my mixed race. And my mom and dad had taught me about the importance of service. So I entered public service thinking I could make a difference about the inequalities of fairness, about right and wrong, basically. So I became a police officer at the Santa Monica Police Department and then the Los Angeles Police Departments way back in the 1980s. I believed I could make a difference fairly enforcing the laws about what was right and wrong, but found something was missing. And I wanted to promote meaningful change on a larger scale. And so there was a pivoting point. The Rodney King incident happened, and I found myself as an African-American Korean sitting on a Metro bus wearing full riot gear in my community in South Central Los Angeles, and it was in flames. The social unrest there deeply affected my ideas of what was right and wrong. And I said to myself, you know, there's just got to be a better way. So I left a rewarding career and returned to the Northwest to go to law school full-time at the Seattle University School of Law. because I thought attorneys could make a difference about, fairness and inequalities. I was later hired as a deputy prosecuting attorney with the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office, and later in my career as chief prosecuting attorney for the city of Renton. I believed I could make a difference fairly prosecuting cases, again, about right and wrong, but again, found something was missing. And I wanted to promote meaningful change on a larger scale. At the same time, also, I became a judge pro tem for King County District Court, Kent Municipal Court, and Auburn Municipal Court. Being a judge pro tem, I also believed I could make a difference fairly applying the laws, again, about right and wrong, but still found something was missing, and I wanted to promote meaningful change on a larger scale. And although I was rated well qualified by 3 different bar associations in King County, I decided not to run for a full-time position as a judge. While I felt I was making a difference and added value in my previous roles, I decided to change my focus and I pivoted again. So I left being a prosecuting attorney and became the director of public safety at Tacoma Community College, basically to gain leadership skills that I could use in the future. I didn't know where, but I knew I needed that. So I managed 3 different departments, 36 employees, and $3 million annual budget. While at Tacoma Community College, I realized that for meaningful change to occur in the field of law and justice, it had to come from the outside. So I saw an opportunity in civilian oversight to do this again, And I was hoping that I could make a difference and promote meaningful change on a larger scale. I started overseeing in civilian oversight with the Fresno Police Department from the outside. And what I mean by that is from outside of the police department as a civilian police auditor or independent reviewer. I started up that office and I worked with community and stakeholders there, and we had amazing results, which I'll talk about hopefully later on. The next opportunity I had was overseeing the Richmond Police Department from the inside of the police department as a civilian manager of the Office of Professional Accountability, where I am now. Very similar to the OPA office in Seattle. But this is quite different because very few civilian oversight leaders in the industry ever have this valuable experience of running as a civilian, a police department internal affairs operation supervising police sergeants. From both my experiences inside and outside, it's sort of a soup analogy. I know the ingredients of good investigations, of internal affairs investigations, of civilian oversight. I know the ingredients. I also know what's missing from that ingredients of the soup. I also know why those things are missing. So that's some of my experience in civilian oversight. So specifically, I've had 12 years of leadership experience in civilian oversight and as a NACOL certified practitioner of oversight in Washington and California, nationally and internationally in Mexico. This provided me with a very unique 360-degree view of civilian oversight, along with my years of experience in law and justice and executive leadership. Also, I have 27 years as an active attorney in the state of Washington in King County, which provides me with legitimacy and credibility in the community of King County. Outside of my prosecution and judiciary relationships in King County, I work with the King County OLEO ever since it started in 2010, the Seattle OPA office, Tacoma Peace Project, the Seattle and NACOL civilian oversight experts in the area, Washington attorneys that are involved in oversight. Lastly, on a personal note, as a true Washingtonian, my wife and I own a house in South King County. My wife is a CASA volunteer advocate for the King County Superior Court. I am a diehard Seahawks fan, go Russ. And my son, who lives in Bellevue, just got engaged this year, so it would be great to be back in the Northwest. But I applied for this position because I believe the community here in King County deserves accountability. And with my demonstrated experience, I can provide leadership, legitimacy, and results. That legacy will outlast all our times at King County and will become a model for the rest of the nation, hopefully to replicate. I'm happy to answer any of the questions that you have posed.
All right, thank you for that, Eddie. We're going to start off with the prepared questions first, the ones you were given in advance. And the first is, what do you believe are the necessary ingredients to an effective police oversight office? And based on your evaluation of OLEO, what is King County doing right and what changes are needed?
So there's a lot of things. It's a really big question because I know things from the outside. I have some connections on the inside. So I'll talk about a little bit of it. But as far as oversight, it's clear that what effective oversight is, it is contained in the NACOL Code of Ethics, the National Association over Civilian Law Enforcement Oversight, and OLEO's 2019 annual report. And also NACOL's Evolution and Growth of Civilian Oversight report that was just released this morning from NACOL, sponsored by the Department of Justice. NACOL, I've been a NACOL member since 2009, and I am a certified practitioner of oversight with NACOL. And I embody all of these Code of Ethics and the Civilian Oversight Project. However, the most important ingredient not in those documents is this: implementation. Basically, if there are clear instructions on, for example, there's clear instructions on how to build a desk, things like that. But if it's not implemented well, you end up with poor results. So the key to implementation, though, is one, authentic relationships and communications, interpersonal communications with stakeholders, and unbiased, neutral, but pointed reports that support trust, credibility, integrity, fairness, unbiasedness, and legitimacy. Also, an effective, cohesive team in OLEO of empowered leaders working towards a thriving, trusting, and accountable community. And I met with many of those this morning. The other things that are in NACOL that I think are important just to mention is number 2, education for everyone. 3, real-time, complete, unfettered information to OLEO, which I've had the privilege of having, and that makes a world difference from my experience. And 4, real-time information to the public about critical incidents and work of the civilian in OLEO. Now, what has King County got right? There's a lot of things King County has right. And it started, like I said, in 2010, but just a few of them. They have the basic structure of the office. They grew from 2 people. Now they've increased the office to 7. Really good job. They're making some very good policy recommendations. They've gained the support from the community to increase the OLEO authority by charter. And I've looked at the reports, and there's a lot of great recommendations. Changes, just a few that just to mention in this short time. And the first one, and the most important one, is OLEO should not be part of the collective bargaining agreement anymore based on its newly passed charter amendments. But if it is, the new appointment of the sheriff and OLEO should have a joint vision of oversight that is contained in the general orders of the sheriff's department that makes the CBA language moot. Next, increase community engagement by tenfold. And I'll talk about a little bit of this later on, hopefully. Next is provide reports that are easy to read, summaries, and why the information is important. For example, in 2019, and by the numbers in the annual report, it says 33 cases were not certified. It doesn't talk about how to improve those 33 cases. So we have 0 cases that are not certified, meaning the investigations were fully completed and had everything in it necessary, so that we can actually focus in on the larger topics of civilian oversight. Last thing is clear communication of OLEO processes and of new charter amendments, because it lets people know what we can do, what we can't do, why we can't do it, and what we can do to improve or change it. The last thing is that what I have done in Fresno as the Office of Independent Review is that tenfold of community engagement. That's what I did. Fresno was 500,000 people in population, and I was an office of 2. And we made incredible results there. And I'll talk about that a little bit, but those things would massive engagement, community engagement, meetings, newsletters, monthly case updates, TV appearances on King County TV and public media, recorded programming series, regular meetings, and building and working with all the other stakeholders available. That's what I did in Fresno. And that was very important. And like I said, I'll talk about those in a minute. But what this is all about is I built credibility and legitimacy here in King County also. through the public defender's office and the prosecution office, through the judiciary and attorneys in oversight, law enforcement, and I was a NACO speaker in Bremerton. I worked in the Tacoma Peace Project as a participant. And like I said, I'm a certified practitioner of oversight in NACO. And you know what? You cannot buy this kind of credibility and legitimacy. It's built over time. And that's what I have.
Thank you for that, Eddie. We're going to turn to the second question. And that is, how do you remain effective while balancing community standards for oversight and the sheriff's department's policies and practices, which can be at odds with each other?
Right. And you're right. They can be at odds, and sometimes they are at odds. So to remain effective during this conflict in civilian oversight, it's complicated, but in actuality, it's simple. The key, as I mentioned before, is authentic communication, credibility, integrity, legitimacy, and meaningful relationships, which I've developed over the years in King County and in civilian oversight. Not only is that important for me as the director, but for our entire office. Then after that, you have to identify what the issues are and work through that to a solution, because you can't really solve a problem if you don't know what the problem is. So I've done that in the past, and how I balance that at the Office of Independent Review, again, which I started in Fresno, and the Office of Professional Accountability, is through regular meetings with all stakeholders. I mean, that was very key. I mean, I conducted massive amount of meetings with stakeholders, transparency about the meetings, going and having listening sessions, getting input. The biggest thing about it was the integrity of the work product we produced, both in Fresno and at OPA, and the legitimacy of my prior experience. When folks find out, as hopefully that I gave you a brief view, that I do walk the walk, there are reasons for my walk that are passionately driven for the vision of oversight and to make meaningful results. And I get results from that walk. So the things, though, is that you do have pushback. And I think that's probably a little bit of what we're talking about. You get pushback, and I've received pushback at OPA and in Fresno from the Police Officers Association, which is the equivalent to the Guild here, and by some citizen groups also. So, but in both of those cases, you can talk to the association, you can talk to the community, you can talk to the city officials. What you'll find is I made believers of them based on my work. Even though they said it has no teeth, the ordinance doesn't have any teeth. But I proved that, hey, watch me work, look at the product, and they were quite surprised. My work product was rarely questioned, and the work product had significant findings, such as in Fresno, I handled 48 different officer-involved shootings that I had to look at when I was backlogged. There was a federal civil rights case that was going on regarding a wrongful death. At Richmond, I handled officer-involved shootings in the complete investigations of officer-involved shootings. High-profile command staff investigations, national media sex case that you may have heard about 5 years ago, and discrimination cases. And the last thing I just want to touch on this is that those results I talked about at the Fresno, in the first 12 months, I made 121 recommendations, 4 systemic reviews, 12 to 15 officer-involved shootings just within that 18-month period, actuality. I reviewed hundreds of cases, issued numerous audit reports, and the complaints went down to an 8-year low, but public confidence for the office went up from 68 to 80% in 1 year based on what we were doing. That was unheard of results based upon what the survey company said throughout their surveys. 90% of the 48 officer-involved shootings that were backlogged, I reviewed. 2/3 of the citizens said that the Office of Independent Review had a positive effect and change on police services. And I did internal affairs investigations. And the last thing is, in Fresno, they didn't have a police commission. I lobbied for that. The city manager and the mayor did not want that. So I made an ad hoc group. I used what was there. It was the CCCJC. They were the ad hoc police commission. And so I work with them exactly like that. And I think that's probably where I should end on that, because I think we're running out of time there for me.
Okay, very good. And that it does have a little bit of a nice segue to this last question of the prepared questions. And that's, can you please share how you would ensure that OLEO effectively connects and engages with the communities in King County?
Yes, that actually does flow into the next question, because that was exactly the work that I did in civilian oversight at Fresno and in Richmond. So everyone in OLEO, all 7 members of OLEO, well 6, but there should be 7 employees, we are all part of community outreach. And I would also put forward that everyone at King County and the council, they're part of community outreach. Actually, the sheriff's department should be, they are part of the community outreach. But it's empowering all of the employees at OLEO is the key to leadership at every position. So I support a team of inspired oversight leaders, and that is critical to our work. Some of those things that I would like to see is what I did in Fresno, because like I said, 500,000 people, and I was a team of 2. So I'm really happy to see that you have a team of 7 and the director. And we had incredible results with I already talked about. But the things that I did there that I would like to see here is regularly provide the OLEO insider with a clear vision about the work in progress and the current events. Sort of similar to what a city manager does and puts out a newsletter. Sometimes city managers put them out every week, bi-weekly or monthly. I've seen them do it every week. And that's the kind of communication I'm talking about letting the community know what is going on with OLEO. OLEO, someone shouldn't mention OLEO and say, what is that? The other things that I'm looking at is monthly podcasts on specific OLEO topics and are with speakers or groups or stakeholders. And that could be farmed out to Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, inside of the news and press push-outs and things like that. Another connection piece is a roadshow on a quarterly basis, going to different areas in King County and having a roadshow and going there and interacting with that community. And it could be sponsored by the League of Women Voters, the ACLU, faith leaders, business groups, nonprofits that serve vulnerable groups. There's a lot more. And I know there's a lot of grassroots communities, programs in King County, such as Peace on Streets, ACL Peace Power. So there's a bunch of things that we could really make some strong connections with. And I'm sure that some of that's already occurred. The last thing is regular reports to the council. But I think the most important piece is finding out how does the community want to connect and engage? Because we can present all this stuff, but the community says, hey, look, I just want meetings every month. That's the best way to communicate with us. Then that's what we should do. It's more listening and to the community needs and seeing them, especially responding and providing information about what they want, and in our annual reports, what the statistic and reports means to the community. Like I said, I did that at Fresno, at the Office of Independent Review with those results. But also I did that at Los Angeles Police Department, where I held numerous town meetings after the Rodney King incident. They recognized my talent of talking and interacting and facilitating with people. And that's what I did. And those meetings were heated, to say the least, but there was conversation, there was facilitation, and that was what was important to bring the community together about what just happened. And through those, and in Richmond, I've done listening sessions to bring about communications and education and trust of the office, the OPA model that we have down in Richmond. And the last thing about that is one of those things that we're transitioning to from full-time sergeants as far as investigators is complete civilianization of investigators.
Okay, thank you for that, Eddie. And that concludes the 3 prepared questions. So now I'd like to just turn it over to the community. Again, if you're able to, please use the raise hands feature in Zoom so we can quickly identify who has a question for Mr. Eddie Aubry. Does anyone in the community have a question that they would like to ask for Mr. Aubry?
I have a question, if I may ask.
Yes, Tom, go right ahead.
Thank you. I know we're a little bit short on time here. I have a few questions, but I'm sure others are in line. So I'm just going to cut to the chase here, Mr. Aubry, if you don't mind.
Sure.
What is your view on the 6 Seattle Police Department officers who are still currently on administrative leave, but are still employed by the SPD and are union members as SPD police who attended the 1/6 insurrection at the Capitol on the 6th of January of this year?
Well, that's an interesting question because, and it's a good question because I think the community deserves to know what is happening and why it's happening. And I'm familiar with that issue that's going on in Seattle, and I don't know all of the specifics as far as the discipline process, the administrative leave process, and how that actually flows in Seattle. To be able to intelligently talk about that. But what I can tell you is that it's important that that the Seattle Civilian Oversight Program there, which I'm sure they have, or maybe they could do better with, is to make sure the public understands what the process is, what the rules are, because sometimes folks don't know what the process is, what the rules are. And so they're saying, why are these people still getting paid? I don't understand that. So those are the kinds of things that I think have to be answered. And that's the first thing. We have to deal with those factual things and what is based in contract. So you have to ferret those things out. And once you ferret those things out, then you move on to the further discussion of what should it be? And that's where the community voice should really come into play. And that's what I would like to go ahead and lift up with, is because that community voice is part of what drives community-based policing. And that's the conversation that should be had, because if the community says these people should not be getting paid, these laws need to be changed, or these collective bargaining agreements need to be worked out and changed, because we want to see if there's these things here, then they shouldn't get paid, or they should be off the job, or they should be fired, however that is. But you have to deal with what you have first, and then you move on to what you want to see happen. And I think that's the best thing to do. And I really do believe that the community does drive policing. And it has been, the father of policing, Robert E. Peel, talked about that. And it's very simple. The police are the community and the community are the police. And that's what it needs to be. So I know I probably didn't answer your question specifically on what I feel about it, but I think that would be the process. That would be the understanding. That way we can move forward as a community.
Thank you, Mr. Aubry.
Tom, thanks for the warm-up question. Looks like we have another question already lined up. So we're starting to get some activity here. Anila.
Yes, thank you so much, Greg and Mr. Aubry as well. Carolyn Bick of the South Seattle Emerald has done a comprehensive job investigating and reporting on the uphill battle for oversight in King County and the pushback and internal pressure that the former OLEO director faced during her tenure. That pushback appears to have come from the King County Sheriff's Office and the police union, and there have also been community calls for the King County Sheriff Mitzi to resign. I want to know if you are familiar with that reporting along with the calls for the sheriff to resign, and how you specifically propose rebuilding trust with the community while addressing the internal conflicts with the very groups that you would be tasked with overseeing.
Thank you. That's a very good question. Yes, I'm very familiar with the three-part article there written, and obviously Deborah Jacobs, she's a member of NACOL also, and so I'm familiar with her and her work, and with NACOL's work, and with OLEO's work. So I am familiar with that. How to rebuild trust? That is a very good question. And what I do is that, first of all, as I started off in this story, when I began, I tell people my background so that they know exactly what they're getting. So I am passionate about what I do, and I am fair about it, but there needs to be oversight. And so I use my prior experience also in oversight working with the unions. And what I know about the King County Union is that they are familiar with who I am, and that my experience working with the police unions in California, because they have one of the strongest peace officer Bill of Rights in the country. So working with Fresno's Police Officer Association, working with the Richmond Police Officer Association has provided that integrity. They will tell the Guild, because I know the Guild will ask, that what is Mr. Aubry about? And they will say, he's a straight shooter. He knows what he's doing. He knows what goes on. He's fair, but he is tough about the oversight. So I think they'll get that there. And that's what those organizations are looking for: fairness, equal treatment, but oversight needs to be pushed. So that's where I established that relationship with the King County Guild, basically the rules of engagement. And so that's how I build that, because my history precedes me before I even get here. So I know exactly what I'm talking about. And it's also, the other part is about demeanor and your affability, about being able to interact and facilitate. Because what I do know about law enforcement is that they do want to have, they want safe communities. I do know this about civilian oversight, that we want safe communities too, and that some duties and job roles that the law enforcement does currently maybe should be handled by other sources. So, but if we start with the basis of what we want and why we want it, all of us, and we embody that, then we can figure out the how. And then part of what I do is, and I use this word carefully, but it's I'm vulnerable. That means I'm not hiding anything. I'm authentic about what it is I'm doing. And when you're authentic and you're vulnerable and you're trying to achieve a goal, that's where you start working on that relationship. Now, I know some people might say, no, that really doesn't work. Well, I've had experience doing it at 2 agencies in California, and it has worked fabulously. Now, they have pushed back on certain issues, though. There's no question about it, because they have certain things that they want to represent for their membership. But that's where you rebuild that relationship, so that you can go forth to go ahead and have a more prosperous King County. You can have incidents that don't use unnecessary force that in those situations. And that way we can have, like I said, a better community. And I would work out with the sheriff. I mean, the last part of that question is with the sheriff. And based upon your charter amendments that were passed, that is incredible that you are having an appointed sheriff. And that changed the dynamics completely. And with a new sheriff in town and with a new Oleo director, either way, the movement that can be made can be gigantic, but it has to be done setting up those relationships from the get-go.
Okay, Eddie, I don't have any hands up at the moment, but I do have a question that was posted in the chat for you. So I'll go ahead and ask that. Mm-hmm. And that was that when you say that you rarely receive pushback on your findings in Richmond, what did that limited pushback entail?
Oh, yeah.
Were your investigations subject to any type of secondary review?
Well, the Richmond, the model C, so the sergeants do the investigations. And this is probably something that people might know or might not know, that in law enforcement agencies, there's a rotation that comes into internal affairs. So officers or sergeants that come in there spend 2-3 years there, maybe 4 years. And so based on that rotation, I train them on how to do the internal affairs investigation, because it is a completely different animal than what they were doing in patrol as far as criminal investigations. And so that's the first thing I do. The pushback, first of all, has to do with I'm a civilian and I'm supervising police sergeants and supervising them and telling them basically what their job is and how to do it. Not how to do it, supervising them about their job. And so I would be the same as Oleo certifying King County's investigation. The only difference is that I technically have the final say on those investigations. So the pushback that I have is the same thing that Olio has right now, is when they don't certify a report, they're saying the investigation wasn't fully completed. You didn't interview the people that you should have interviewed. It wasn't fairly done. And that's why we're not certifying. That doesn't happen where I am. Now, technically, like I said, I could tell them, but that's not what I do. I let those sergeants assume leadership roles in that investigation. And then if there's issues such as why don't they interview a certain officer? Why don't they interview certain witnesses? Why didn't they collect certain information? Why didn't they ask certain questions? Why was that interview with that subject officer that was involved in the shooting 5 minutes long? Those are things that I pose to them because I want them to have skin in the game. And I ask them, why? So what's going on? How come you didn't do this? How come you do this? We talk about it. And after that conversation and that pushback, then they start to understand why this is important, what this is all about, what oversight is. Then they start getting it. So I actually end up training a lot of sergeants and how should I say, educate them about oversight in there. So when they leave, they actually can become better supervisors about oversight and understand the community about oversight. And so that's a lot of the pushback I do. And the other pushback is general, that they don't want a civilian to be telling certain things that happen within an investigation, or when I've been out to an officer involved shooting and I may get yelled at by the officer involved in the shooting, but that's only because of emotions. But see, that's the thing. I have the demeanor to accept that, knowing that there's emotions flowing, and then come back to it. But most of the time, I don't even have to say it. The guild members are the ones that say, wait. We know that he is trying to do his job, and they settle that situation. So I never really had to do anything about that particular situation. That's where that credibility and legitimacy comes from. But it does not affect the work about accountability on whether the force was necessary or unreasonable, or whether it was reasonable or excessive. So that's just some of the pushback. I could tell you a lot more stories, but I don't have time for that.
All right, very good. So looking to see if anyone else has another question for Mr. Aubry.
I do, if there's time.
Go right ahead, Tom.
Yes.
Tom, yes.
And thank you again, Mr. Aubry. In doing a little background research on you here, I see that you spent 12.5 years as an active police officer in both the Santa Monica and Los Angeles police departments. And I come from a family of cops in the NYPD. So my question is this. I work with the ACLU People Powered Group on police accountability at the state level.
Right.
I'm sure you're familiar.
Yes, I am familiar.
And we were able to pass some legislation this most recent session where we were able to, I'll say, frame police use of force going forward across the state. Obviously, specifically focused here in Seattle and King County, considering what happened last summer.
Yes.
So my question is this. How do you, being a former police officer gives you a lot of insight. There's no question to these kind of situations in terms of how to communicate with police unions, how to deal with their collective bargaining, which is something that handcuffs local police ordinances all the time.
Right.
How do you balance your understanding as a police officer with your current work? In other words, as a cop on the street, you know what's going on. You know how, you know what life on the street for a cop is. It's a tough job. At the same time, obviously, community safety, community input, responsibility the police have to protect and serve. So how do you balance those two things in your current work?
As you said, I do know the work, but one of the things that I did as a police officer, I've been heavily involved in personal development. And for the police officers that are doing the job, actually, I end up mentoring some of the police officers about about their career, about what they're doing and why they're doing it. Because as you probably know, and most people, becoming a police officer is more about, it's not a job, it is a profession, and it should be a calling. And for those individuals that are there, that calling should be there about what why they wanted to be a police officer and what they wanted to do. And I talk to people about those things, and I'm pretty open about it, because if you're there for a paycheck, you're in the wrong job. You need to be there for a calling. And I've worked with individuals, and they get to know me, and they find out, hey, wait a minute, let me find out some more. So I've actually worked with individuals about their desires and what they want in their careers and things like that, because it is a tough job. And you have to have the values and the morals to be able to handle that job, but you also have to have the personal wherewithal to handle that job. And I've worked with individuals, and I clearly express this about these kinds of things, because I interview or I talk with every new recruit that comes in about what they're here for, why they became a police officer, and things like that. So to shorten up my answer here is that through my mentoring, I've actually mentored police officers, and they have left the job because it wasn't right for them. I've also mentored other officers that actually they needed to grow themselves to be a better police officer so that they can be a better in another job assignment or promote wherein. And then some folks, just like anything else, it's a third. And some folks, you can take them to the water, but you can't make them drink it. So that's how I balance that out, because we're here to improve. But the other side of it is the accountability. There is, and you know from probably your experience too, that probably a lot of police officers know who some of the issues are in the police department. The other thing too is they will be the first one to tell you that that officer should probably not be on the department. But it's the thing about, well, you know, maybe someone else needs to do it. So I've talked to quite a few people, including guild union people, that said, no, we really need you here because we need to hold officers accountable. And it's good that you're doing, as long as it's fair and unbiased, neutral, there's no hidden agendas. And that's what I've done. And that's why the cases that I've been involved with that included, and there's confidentiality laws that involve terminations or separations from the department involving officers or people in command staff positions have been respected, because the investigations were done the way they should have been done, covered everything they needed, and no one is going to get or slide by with something just because of their role or their title or anything like that. So that's how I balanced it. So they know I'm a straight shooter on it both ways. But the thing about it is, and that's working with the police department. But the other thing is with the community really needs to know what's going on. And that by far is some of the angst I hear in the community. We don't know what's going on. And when we do find out what's going on, we don't have all the information. And then when we do find out the information 2, 3, 4 years later, it needs to be changed. That is not effective oversight. And like I said, there was a new report that came out by NACL that talks a little bit about this. It's just sort of like discipline. If you're going to have discipline of officers, it should be pretty immediate, not 5 years down the road, because then it has no effect on the behavior. So, Tom, I hope I answered some of your questions. It is quite a balancing act, though. You
have, Mr. Aubry, and I appreciate, first of all, your candor, and I appreciate the insightful answer. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Tom.
Any other questions for Mr. Aubry? Make a second call. Anyone have any other questions they'd like to hear Mr. Aubry? If not, we'll in a moment. I just want to leave that question out there for a minute. If not, we'll move into letting you say some closing comments. But I just want to check again to see if anyone else has any questions for Mr. Aubry. Okay, hearing none. any closing comments you'd like to make?
Well, yes, I have a closing comment, but I have a question for Mr. Aubry. One of the things, and I do want to bring this up because I don't want anyone to not address it. When I was a police officer in Los Angeles, I knew that something was missing. And so I started looking for avenues for solutions. And that's when I went to the DARE program. And I taught the DARE program for 4.5 years to high school, junior high, and elementary school kids. And it was all about personal development, peer pressure, consequences, those kinds of values and skills. So I was looking for a way to do something different that was really going to affect and improve the community. As a prosecuting attorney, I didn't spend my time litigating in trials and felons. I spent probably, I think it was about 3 years handling drug court and treatment court for adults and juveniles. And that was important because that was another avenue to deal on a holistic basis with wraparound services for individuals that were either in economic strife, that had addictions to drugs, that didn't have the wraparound service of shelter, food, your basic needs. And so that's what drew me to that. So hopefully you can see a connection in my past that connects all the way through into civilian oversight. So I just wanted to make that, I just wanted to put that out there because because it's an evolution. And I think that's really important for folks to know. So just to close this up, is that I really believe in accountability and the OLEO's role. And I've watched carefully participated in the evolution of OLEO ever since its inception back in 2010. And OLEO needs a leader who knows and has been part of the King County community and I've been that for the past 27 years, who've demonstrated experience, with demonstrated experience, and I have that. So I hit the ground running with a unique, holistic 360-degree evolution of expertise with 3 significant advantages. And I talked about that: leadership, legitimacy, and the results. I talked about the leadership because success and failure depends on leadership. The vision, I have the vision, it's been demonstrated. I had a lifelong dedication to this type of work. The subject matter, I know the subject matter. It's civilian oversight over the 12 years, and I know the entire body of it. So there might be some nuances that come up every once in a while, but no one's going to pull the wool over my eyes on civilian oversight or in particular law enforcement. I've demonstrated various leadership roles in the last 17 years. Like I said, $3 million budgets, 36 employees with 3 different departments. And if you've gone at Tacoma Community College, if you know the college environment, there's an array of different people, just like there's an array of different people in the community. And that's the kind of interaction I had with the Student Senate and the administration there. I have my legitimacy, I have credibility and integrity that's been established over 20 years here in King County and Seattle with the accountability partners here and stakeholders. And this will help to get results. It doesn't mean I get a pass on anything. It just means that I have some credibility and integrity so we can get down to work. And like I said, the last thing are results. And I think I already talked about those results and some of the changes that are occurring, even at Richmond, civilianizing the sergeants that are doing the investigations. So I think based on the results, especially in Fresno, that short amount of time, what I'm doing at Richmond, along with everything I can see, like I said, it's a very holistic look at it. I'm very excited. I'm very positive, and I just am so optimistic about what can be done here, especially in the next few months. And if selected, I am really looking forward to getting down to work on this. And with those results I did in Fresno and what I've been doing in the past, just imagine what we all could do as a community together. And I'd like to thank you for your time. Thank you for the questions for everyone. And thank you for participating.
Mr. Aubry, thank you.
Thank you.
Really appreciate your continued interest and your time throughout the day today.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. Bye, everyone.
Okay, with that, we're gonna just take a 5-minute quick intermission. I'll go ahead and post our return time in the chat. So we're gonna return at 7:02 p.m. And I'll again post the link to the survey so you can provide feedback. The way the survey is structured, it's probably best if you wait until you've heard from both candidates because you'll be asked to comment on each of them. But I just want to make sure I post that link often enough that everyone gets a chance to see it. And with that, we'll be back in just 5 minutes. Tamara, good evening.
Hi, Greg. How are you?
Doing well. Looking forward to getting started.
Yeah.
And I'd like to start things off by just asking you to take a few minutes, up to about 5 minutes, to just introduce yourself and your career and your work, especially the connections to this position as Director of Olio and why you're interested.
Sounds good. Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Tamer Abuzaid. First things first, Tamer like hammer. If I get the job, you can work on my last name, but for the time being, my first name is pronounced Tamer. I'm currently a staff attorney at the Chicago office of a large civil rights organization. In that capacity, I deal mainly with discrimination cases based on race, religion, national origin. Wherever the discrimination happens. We're talking about employment, immigration, policing, public accommodation, wherever it happens. In the past, I've worked at the Civilian Office of Police Accountability in Chicago, participating in dozens and dozens of investigations of police misconduct. You may have heard that the situation here in Chicago is a little tougher when it comes to policing. Illinois was the first state that to have its own torture commission because the Chicago Police Department was actually torturing people literally. So the issues I've dealt with here in Chicago include killings by the police, excessive force, domestic violence, constitutional violations, bad police practices like biased policing and bogus warrants, and other stuff like that. I have also been working with the Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, which grew out of the National Committee to Free Angela Davis back in the 70s. This, to me, is the most important work I've done. We were able to free survivors of police torture, either through the courts or getting pardons. We are currently very close to passing an ordinance in the Chicago City Council over the objections of the mayor because it establishes real strong oversight. And I've been working with the Chicago City Council, drafting the ordinance, negotiating it, doing research, testifying at hearings, all that good stuff. So I also have the policy experience as well. But the reason that I say that my work with the Alliance is the most important is not just because it made me well-versed in policy or in being able to navigate meetings with office holders and staffers and all that stuff. It's because it kept me really close to the communities that we're trying to serve. I have made amazing connections with family members of people who have seen their friends and families killed by the police, who have seen their friends and family get tortured by the police, get stopped way too often by the police, wrongfully incarcerated for decades, you name it. We've seen it here in Chicago. And it truly cemented in me dealing with these families, sharing their pain, sharing their happiness when their loved ones come home. It truly cemented in me the idea that nothing about public safety will work unless it comes from the communities, and especially from communities that are over-policed. I am someone who believes in shrinking the prison industrial complex. I'm proud of that fact. Now, to be frank, getting there does not take an office like the Office of Law Enforcement Oversight, like Olio. Getting there takes political decisions made by your representatives. So under my leadership, the office would keep very close relationships with the public. But at the end of the day, the public will still have a lot of work to do in terms of getting their representatives to satisfy what the community believes is public safety should look like, right? how to tackle the root causes of violence in our communities, how to deal with crime. Should our approach be punitive or rehabilitative or transformative? These are all questions that we are all grappling with in this day and age, and that have to be answered on a larger scale than just police oversight. So it would be my honor to play a role in a larger transformation of reevaluating what public safety looks like. The ordinance that creates OLEO states that the office is supposed to represent the interests of the public. So I promise to do my part in representing the interests of the public when it comes to oversight of the King County Sheriff's Office. I will also always remind myself, remind you all, remind the county's elected and appointed officials that there are many other parts of the puzzle as well that will need to be addressed. I know that you've been here already for about an hour, and I know usually people start mentally checking out at about an hour and a half, so I'm going to keep my answers short, and we can go to the next question if you'd like, Greg.
Thank you, Mr. Aubry. I'd like to first turn to the first of the prepared questions that you were given in advance, and that one is, what do you believe are the necessary ingredients to an effective police oversight office? And based on your evaluation of OLEO, what is King County doing right, and what changes are needed?
So I think there are a lot of things that have to be satisfied for there to be an effective police oversight office. Number one, the office has to be independent. That means that the office has to be independent from political influence. The office has to be independent from law enforcement. And the office also has to be independent when it comes to, for example, making certain investigative findings in terms of saying, basing findings and basing conclusions on the facts, on the objective facts in front of us, right? As opposed to being swayed by one thing or the other. That's number one. The second thing I think is transparency. It is essential that the community sees the work being done, as opposed to just seeing a final outcome. We want you to be able to see the gears as they're moving, how it's happening, and for you to be able to make a conclusion on whether the process itself is good enough for the office and it serves the community. The third thing is community engagement. Like I said earlier, I believe that nothing will change in the arena of public safety for the better unless the community is heavily involved in making decisions. That means that the community has to have an effective voice that is heard by people at OLEO and by their political leaders. I also think that an effective oversight office will have to be proactive. When I was investigating cases of misconduct, it was all about playing whack-a-mole. One officer does something bad, you get them, you punish them, and then another officer does something bad, and so on. And the game continues. If we are going to have actual transformative, systemic improvements, that means that we will have to work on a bigger scale. And that bigger scale is policy. So we have to be proactive in terms of gathering data, collecting information, analyzing it, and consistently looking at what is working and what is not working. And if something is not working, let's figure out how to make it better before it results in worse and worse outcomes. And finally, I think that, this is something that unfortunately is missing from the vast majority of oversight offices in the country, which is real power. Oftentimes, an office will have to depend on, a county council or a city council or a mayor or a county executive to actually follow through, right? At the end of the day, what you do as an office is you make recommendations. I think it's really important for the people, if the office doesn't have the power itself, then the people behind it, in this case, for example, the county council, to back that up and make sure that the correct work is being done. I think to me, the biggest thing that is being done right now is what we're doing right now. We are having this open selection process that is transparent, where the community gets to attend, gets to ask questions, right? This is an example of what it needs to be. And we need to be doing this all the time. I also think another thing is passing the ordinance that increased the additional powers, for example, for the office. Some things I think that we might need to change are number one, and again, this is something that is common in the entire country, is the idea of the police contracts, right? Police unions have been able to negotiate collective bargaining agreements that really handcuff, oversight agencies and make our work a lot more difficult. That needs to change. That means that the county, when it is negotiating the next contract, needs to make sure that it negotiates a better contract. It also means sometimes, advocating for changes maybe on a state level as well. I also think that one of the other things may be, probably dedicating some additional resources to the office. And finally, there has to be a sort of a legal and political mechanism to ensure that the sheriff's office is cooperating in a timely and professional way with OLEO. It can't just be please, even though we should say please, but it also has to be, this is your job to cooperate, and lack of cooperation must have consequences because we have to work together. Hopefully it doesn't come to that. And hopefully with the new appointment process of a sheriff, we will be able to have a sheriff who is completely vested in the kind of work that we want to do. But if that happens, you have to have the backing of the political leadership of the county.
All right, thank you for that. I'm gonna move on to the second of the prepared questions. And that is, how do you remain effective while balancing community standards for oversight and the Sheriff's Department's policies and practices, which can be at odds with each other?
So I think that in the very beginning, you have to function from the standpoint that any power that OLEO has, any power that the county council has, any power that the sheriff has, actually belongs to the people. Right? That has to be the approach that you take from the beginning. In a democratic society, the people tell the police how to act and not the other way around, right? So to the extent that the people say one thing and anybody else says another, the people have to be the ultimate authority. What does that mean practically? Since part of OLEO's mandate is to be a conduit to the community, we have to listen to what the community is telling us, including what the community believes are the proper standards, right? Once we get that input, you do two things. The first is we conduct our own research into whether the results of community recommendations would benefit the public. If we find that it does, then we should make a recommendation based on that. If through our research we find that the community recommendations would not benefit the public, then we have to say that too. We have to not recommend these things because in our analysis, they would not help the public. Now we can relay to the political leadership, for example, that what the community needs are, and tell the sheriff and tell the council. But whether OLEO itself makes a recommendation must, at the end of the day, be an objective exercise. It has to be based on input and data, and what that data tells us, and what position that data supports. This does not mean that we have to have absolute proof that something will benefit the public before we recommend it, right? People sometimes forget that hypothesis is part of the scientific process too. So if we need more information to know whether something is good policy or not, then we can recommend pilot programs and things like that to collect the information we need. I would also like to remind myself and all of us that oversight, when we're talking about oversight now, oversight is about policing, and that's one piece of the puzzle. Policing and public safety are not the same thing. So I think the bigger changes that the public demands are things that are more holistic and that don't necessarily fall under police oversight. Things like spending priorities, pretrial detention, stuff like that. You don't have to be, a genius to have guessed on 1.5 years ago that crime was going to rise nationally after a pandemic when people got very little relief from the government. That was known. We knew it was coming. What did we do about it? Those are political decisions that have to be made by the people and by their representatives. But when it comes to things that Olio can recommend changing, things like use of force guidelines, biased policing, like I said earlier, those have to be based on two things: community input and running that input through objective standards and analyzing it to make sure that it passes the test.
Great, thank you for that. And I'm gonna move on to the last of the prepared questions. And then following that, we're gonna hear some questions from the community. That last prepared question is, can you please share how you would ensure that Olio effectively connects with and engages with the communities in King County?
Yes, so according to my wife, I'm a bit of a ham, which is good because I want everybody in King County to know what this office does. And I was actually really happy to hear today from one of the Olio employees about the kind of communication that they really like to engage in, and that it comes more from a co-governance model, so to speak, as opposed to a PR model. I'm not interested in a communications department that is there to spin our work to the public, to make it seem like we're awesome and we're great and we're doing an excellent job. What I am interested in is blanketing the community with information so that everybody in King County knows the following things: what Olio is, what Olio does, and what Olio can and cannot do under the law. And to achieve that, I envision 3 steps. Number 1 is using media, both countywide as well as local and hyperlocal media outlets. I want you to know about Olio, not just in your big Seattle newspaper, but in your local newsletter as well. Second is holding large public meetings or town halls or listening sessions, whatever you want to call them. And being really intentional when you're doing that and reaching out to communities that have specific grievances, communities that are over-policed, for example, communities of color. And then third, we have to dedicate time to smaller meetings instead of large public meetings, because that's where we can really get a one-on-one and get a better understanding of one another and a better understanding of exactly what's being asked of us. These meetings are, should be dedicated to specific issues and should be with specific representatives of specific groups, right? For example, how is police dealing with transgender and non-binary people? Right? What are some special considerations that people in the rural areas of the county face? These specific situations have to involve specific outreach to get the proper input that we need.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Abu-Zaid, and I will turn it over to the community. If anyone has a question that they would like to ask, feel free. If you can, use the raise hands feature, but based on our last interaction, it looks like it'll work just fine if somebody just wants to volunteer with a question.
Greg, I wouldn't mind asking a question. If that's
I'll go right ahead.
Okay. First of all, thank you for being here as a candidate. I've been in similar situations and it can be a little bit overwhelming, so I appreciate the time and energy you're putting into making this happen. I work with the ACLU at the state legislature level here. And my question is this: I'm not on staff, it's a volunteer position, let me be clear about that. I certainly don't speak for the ACLU of Washington or national. Let me ask you a question. In your experience, obviously, as someone who has some experience on the ground, these things, you do. I can see that in the way that you speak and the specifics of what it is you're sharing. In Chicago, in your process so far, what did you consider to be the biggest roadblock to creating inroads with police unions and the collective bargaining agreement negotiations, which are ruled by state law here in Washington? What were the biggest roadblocks for you in getting inroads in that regard?
The biggest block is, I think, so there are a few things. I think one of the issues is the amount of money that goes into politics, right? And the influence that something like the FOP, which is our local police union here, can exert on the political process. That's one thing, because at the end of the day, collective bargaining agreements have to be, here in Chicago, have to be approved by the city council. So that's one problem. Another problem is there are things that have been so enshrined currently in the CBAs, in the collective bargaining agreements, that it is really difficult to take them out, even if you go to arbitration. So there are certain things where the city would go to arbitration over a certain provision because the parties can't come to an agreement. And the arbitrator will say, you've been doing it this way this long, you should keep doing this. So that's another issue. I think a third issue that we've dealt with very acutely here is our police union leadership. For example, our police union president is someone who came out on January 7th and talked about, how the people who stormed the Capitol didn't really do anything and they were just taking a tour, or whatever he said, right? We are dealing sometimes, and we've also had a lot of officers, mainly Black officers, come out and say, listen, the FOP does not represent us like it represents white officers, for example. So the organization as a whole, sometimes, and this is of course a fact-intensive thing, this depends on who you're dealing with, sometimes there is a very big reluctance to actually engage in trying to make things better. And I think at the end of the day, if collective bargaining agreements are not addressed, any kind of oversight will not work. Because truly the collective bargaining agreements hamper true accountability so much that it is almost impossible getting real change done if those agreements aren't addressed.
I really appreciate your candor in that answer and the specifics as well. That's what we're finding here, and that's why we're going with the state legislature to change the laws. And actually, we're working to change the classification of the police union here because they're bundled in with the dock workers and that kind of thing. And because of that, it gives them certain similar rights, but because of their specific job responsibilities and the responsibility to the community, we're trying to separate that out so that those things that apply to the dock workers don't apply to the police. So I appreciate your specific answer on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. And I do think it is a special consideration, and that state legislatures should deal with police unions in a different way than some of the other trade unions, for example. And just to let you know, Illinois was very close to passing. Illinois passed a huge criminal justice reform omnibus bill, and included in it until the very last minute was a provision that said police unions are not allowed to negotiate over discipline. So they can negotiate over salaries and work conditions, vacation days, all that stuff, but not over the discipline process. It got taken out at the last minute, but it is something that is still being considered, I think, in lots of state legislatures around the country, because it is such a serious problem and such a serious obstacle.
It is the key. Thank you very much again.
Okay, we have another question waiting from Victoria. Victoria, go right ahead.
First, again, thank you so much for being here and answering questions for us this evening. I'm curious, coming from another area of the country, so much of what you have talked about in your strategy and what's important here is community trust, community communication, and building those channels of two-way communication with the people here in King County. What do you believe are the strengths and the challenges of coming into this position without those existing networks and relationships in the community already?
I think that's a great point. I think there are definitely some pros and cons, right? Every challenge is an opportunity and so on. So I definitely think that, not having those relationships already may at first seem like a disadvantage. I think it can also be turned into an advantage. I think it gives you a clean slate. You are entering the landscape, so to speak, as a new person. People have not yet made up their mind about you, and so they may be willing to learn more, and you may be able to actually give that right first impression. I also think that it allows for someone, for example, who would be in my position, to really be able to rely on the strengths that the office has already built. And by that, I really mean the staff, the current staff at Olio. I had the pleasure of speaking with them, and I found them to be just really cool people who seem very dedicated to trying to make things better. And I think, being willing to ask for help and being willing to venture into new areas is an absolute must for someone to be able to succeed in this position. When I first started doing this in Chicago, for example, I had just spent a few years in Washington, D.C. I had been, I graduated from Georgetown Law over there. I worked at a law firm there. And when I came back, it was almost like a new reintroduction for me. And I was able to get in there and to really to get a lay of the land, identify who the people are who, for example, shared my concerns, identify the organizations, and be able to collect as much information as possible, and was able to very quickly build this network, and be able to now depend on it, and now have all these people who I speak with and who I work with. So I think it may seem like a disadvantage. I think it actually gives a very good fresh start, and I think it can be helpful.
Thank you for speaking to that. And Greg, I'll just call attention to, there was a question from Manila further up in the chat. They have had to leave, but I would love to hear an answer to it if there is time at the end as well. Yeah,
actually no one is waiting, so I will, I'm sorry, who was the question from? I see it. All right, here we are. So what are your views on the pros and cons of having somebody with or without direct police background in this position? Just a question for you.
Yeah, so that's something that I strongly believe in. I think that when we talk about oversight, we're talking about accountability. And when you're talking about accountability, it means that the police, the sheriff's office, whatever we're using the term police generally or generically, has to be accountable to the people, right? The residents of the county in this case. And we have tried so much to have this idea of relying on either current law enforcement to investigate themselves, or people who were in law enforcement to investigate them. And I think generally speaking, that does not turn out well. Now, it is not because, people don't want to do their job. Absolutely not. But I think there is a certain, like I said earlier, the ordinance says we need to represent the interests of the public. Right? I think there is a certain thing once you go through the process of going through a police academy, getting trained, living as a police officer on the street. I think what I found in my experience, for example, in Chicago, is that people who had that experience were much more likely to let things go because that's just how things worked. Right? And again, it's not because they're dishonest. It's not because they don't care about their jobs, but there is a very serious indoctrination that happens, right? When you learn how to deal with the community, when you learn to evaluate everything as a threat, all that stuff, that makes it very hard to break out of. Not impossible, but very hard. So I, generally speaking, do believe that civilians should be in charge, and should be there. It should be purely civilian oversight. Now, that's not to say that someone with some law enforcement background will not have certain insights that maybe someone who doesn't have experience will have, right? Definitely, there may be cases where someone with that background will have those insights. But I think in the aggregate, overall, it is much preferable to have a pure civilian, so to speak, doing this work, as opposed to someone with who has gone through that type of work.
Thank you for that. And I just want to turn it back to the community again. If anyone else has a question, just feel free to speak up. Any other questions for Mr. Abu-Zaid? We have plenty of time left. I just want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to interact.
I told you people check out after an hour and a half, Greg.
Well, we are going to move to a wrap up here if there's aren't any other questions. So I do want to just make another call just to see if anyone has any questions for Tamara.
Tamara, let me assure you, it's not a matter of checking out. You've answered a lot of questions already, honestly. So thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
All right. It's back to you, Mr. Abu-Zaid, if you would like to just wrap up and have a closing comment.
Yeah, thank you all so much for attending. It's really great to come to a meeting like this and find 50 people here like wanting to participate in this process. So I really appreciate you attending. I really appreciate you listening to me and asking me questions. And I hope I obviously hope to get this position. But more than that, if I get this position, I hope to be able to have your confidence as the community in terms of trying to make positive change and trying to have a real system of accountability and oversight. And the one promise that I will make, if this ends up being my job, is that I will always involve the community and make sure that the community's voice is heard, because I'll wrap it up very quickly. I'm a soccer fan, and the way I look at it is this: if I go into a soccer match and I play a really good game, but I mess up once and I score an own goal and I end up losing the game, I'll be sad, but at least I'll know the process was fair. If I go into a game and I have a referee who keeps supporting the other team, who gives them all these penalties, who ejects 3 of my players, right? And I lose, I'll leave the game and I'll be really angry, right? Because I know the process wasn't fair. And I think most people can take a loss if they at least know the process is fair. Now, the way that what this means to me is that we can disagree over outcomes sometimes. We can disagree over recommendations sometimes. But what I want people to know is that they can trust the process. They know that they have been heard. They know that they have had input. And that will make it that much easier to have buy-in from everyone. And then even if we disagree on something, on an outcome that happens, at the very least, we know that we used a good, fair process to get there. And that's really the most important thing that I want to be able to instill in us. You're on mute, Greg.
First time of the night. I thought I was going to make it through. So I just want to thank you again for your interest in the position, your continued interest in the position, and spending this time with us today. As a reminder to everyone on the call, we're going to be back again tomorrow to do this all over again at noon for those that couldn't attend tonight or want to come back with more questions. I am also going to make one more post in the chat where you can click the link to an opportunity to provide feedback on the 2 finalists tonight, and we'll do the same again tomorrow. This session was recorded, will be recorded again tomorrow as well. Likewise, those recordings are going to be available on the county's website along with the survey opportunity. So,
Greg, like I said, I'm from Chicago, so I might go to that Survey Monkey link and just like fill it out 10 times, okay?
we'll figure that out.
Thank you everyone so much for attending and for your questions. I really appreciate it.
Thank you all.